Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Rough Rider, where every week we talk writing, self-publishing, and making it as an author. Today, I've got with me author Aaron Ray Ballard, who is writing a genre that we haven't talked about before. So I am very excited. So Aaron, or Ray, goes by Ray. Ray writes horror, which I love. So I'm super thrilled. So how are you doing today, Aaron? Ray, I keep messing this up because I'm reading your
That's fine.
author name
Either
right in
either
front of
one.
me. Yeah.
Either one. What are you talking about personally? Because right now it's hot here in West Texas, and my water, the city shut off the water to the town.
Oh God, God! It's
So
108 degrees here in Vegas right now, and I feel like people
uh,
would die if they shut the water off.
yeah, so it's coming back on, but it's trickling out. That's why I'm at work,
Oh,
and so
it's a good way
because
to
my
find
home
some
is like
water.
my home is like 90 degrees, and I haven't been able to run the air conditioner, and I'm cooling it off now. The water came back on, so I'm up here at work.
Cool.
That's what day I've been having.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm sorry you're experiencing a water shortage right now in extreme summer heat in Texas, of all places, which must be brutal. But I guess to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, who are you? How'd you get started with
okay,
writing? All that.
sure. I've been writing all my life, but I didn't self-publish until a couple of years ago, 2002. So I'm 55 years old. I should have published a book a long time ago because I don't know why. I just life got in the way. You start working, you start a career, you get sidetracked, you have relationships, life in general, and next thing you know, you're old. And then COVID hit, and everybody was home. It seemed like, and I had all the time in the world. And I was like, what am I going to do to fill my time? And I went, well, holy crap! What I've got all these stories that are in my head that I can't get out and haven't been able to get out. So I'm going to write a book. So I did, got it published, and it's something I'm proud of. I just wish I'd done it a lot sooner. And I wrote a book with horror short stories because that's my first love since I was a kid. I loved Twilight Zone. I read Stephen King, did all this stuff way too young. And I watched in the 70s when I was a kid. There's a lot of great horror, not only at the movies, but on TV as well. There was Kolchak the Night Stalker, all kinds of crazy shows that they would not ever put back on TV. Salem's Lot. I don't know if you remember the original TV show
I did.
Salem's Lot,
Yeah,
but
I've seen
they
it.
had a great horror uh, made back then. But Twilight Zone, Stephen King, all that stuff. I fell in love with reading. I wanted to write like Stephen King. I wanted to tell stories like I saw on TV. So I've been writing my whole life, not really giving the stories to anybody to read, just for myself. And then, like I said, COVID hit. I decided to finally write a book.
Nice. Well, COVID was a perfect time to get started on something that you really didn't have time to do before, because life, like you said, life really does get in the way, especially with writing. Like I've talked before about when people are trying to set a routine for themselves to actually like write their book in a reasonable amount of time. Like it's hard to find time to do this, to the point where even if you write like 50 words that day, at least it's something, like
Right.
it's some progress. But like if you work full time, you have a family, you have just like a regular life, it's not easy to actually put all this in there. So I actually have talked to a lot of people so far who are like around your age range, actually, who were just saying like I always wanted to do this, I just really didn't have an opportunity to, and COVID definitely was a perfect time to get some things done. So the 70s was a great decade for horror, the 80s too. So like growing up around that time period, I can see why someone would end up really getting that in their head, and that sticks with you, that's gonna be what you want to write in. So your book is called All the Monsters Are Here.
Yes.
There it is. And it is 13 short stories, horror short stories. I always have a lot of respect for people who can write short stories. I've written a few, but I always feel like there may be some of them I like more than others. But I feel like I'm better suited for maybe like a little bit of a longer thing, just because I have a hard time keeping things super, super concise. So for you, like, why did you decide to go into doing it as short stories, like doing a collection of short stories instead of necessarily writing one big novel?
I tried writing a novel. I've written 3 novels in my life. You notice they're not out there. It's one thing to say you're going to write the next great American novel or the next great horror novel, whatever. You do it, and you, you do all that work, and it's not any good. And I kind of lost faith in myself because I would give my stuff out to certain. I always tell when they're being nice to you,
Mm-hmm.
and well, you wrote a book, so I've written 3 novels, and I just honestly once I failed doing that, in my mind, I failed, I was gun shy and I lost the confidence. Even writing this book, why it took so long to do it was getting your stuff out there, letting it be read. That I had to get over that hurdle. Once I did, I just made the decision to just do it. And I did it, and be damned, whatever the consequences. And so short stories, over the years, I've written a bunch of short stories. So what I did was I went back and looked basically every short story I've ever written or started or had an idea for. And I went through this system of, is this worth being in the book? Is this book worthy? Is this book worthy? And so I probably had about 6 or 7 stories that I'd already written that went in the book. And then I thought, how many am I going to write? I think I'll write 13. 13 is a good horror number. And so I need to come up with 4 more stories. And so a lot of these are ideas I've had. A lot of these, because I write notes, I write outlines, I write summaries. So I have all this stuff. And I think 2 were brand new, but the rest of them were stuff I've had in my head for years, for decades. And I just never had time to write it.
So there's so many different, I mean, this is true of any genre, but like for horror, there's a lot of different kinds of horror. Like you've got like supernatural, you have like slashers and all that. So maybe not all of your short stories in that book are one subgenre of horror. Maybe it's diverse. I don't know. But like, what do you tend to gravitate towards? Like, I like supernatural more than I like just, kind of like a violent slasher, although I can appreciate a slasher movie for sure. I love House of a Thousand Corpses and any Rob Zombie movie is like one of my, I love those. But what appeals to you with horror? Like, what do you kind of naturally gravitate towards?
Supernatural, because it kind of frees you up. You can kind of come up with kind of anything. Whereas if it's the natural world, you're limited by the natural world. So supernatural kind of frees you up a little bit. But the natural world is stuff like slashers, if you want to say that's natural world, stuff that maybe could happen. It brings out more of your creative side. Supernatural, again, it brings out your creative side, but you're not limited. Mm-hmm. So I like the challenge too. But if I had a choice to make, it would be the supernatural, paranormal. That's my main interest. And then horror next door, or horror that could happen in your neighborhood, in your home, is also frightening. So I like a little bit of both.
So for the the 13, good number, short stories in All the Monsters Are Here. I read through and looked at some of your stuff before this interview just to see like what some of the short stories in there would be. And I did see werewolves, so I see the supernatural element. So do you want to tell us about a few of the stories? I mean, if you want to go into all of them, feel free. But I guess I'd probably stick with the ones that are your favorites that out of your book. Like which one? Tell us a little bit about the stories themselves.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King, and one of my favorite books of his short story. I love his short story books, but there was one called Skeleton Crew, and in that book had The Mist, and that's probably my favorite thing he's ever written. And it's kind of a novella. And The Mist was in a book of short stories, but it was like over 100 pages, and the rest of his short stories were short stories. And I wanted to honor that, because I love his long novellas. I love The Long Walk. You name it, written by Stephen King, I probably love it. But The Mist is absolutely one of my favorite things he's ever written. I wanted to honor just that and have a long story. So that's probably the one I'm most partial to. And it's the oldest. I actually started writing that when I was in high school. So that was forever ago. And if anyone that reads the story, I've got a lot of Y2K mentions in there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Probably very few people will know what that was, but I have a lot of Y2K references that are in there.
I'm old enough to remember what that was like when that happened, and it was, oh my god, the chaos. So
the zombie apocalypse happens about that time, because back then people were going crazy. Y2K was, when it was coming, it was basically all the computer systems were going to shut down the world, and everybody thought it was the end of the world, and people were stocking up on survival supplies, and people were getting crazy, and it literally looked like the apocalypse was coming. Then it came and went, and nothing happened. But I, for one, knew a lot of people who were building storm shelters, buying weapons, buying ammunition, buying water, you name it. And around that time, I had a nightmare, and it was this story where I was in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And it was a horrible nightmare. I woke up from it like, oh my God, that was horrible. And in my dream, and this was 1998, 1999 when I had this. And in my dream, I was being chased by zombies that were running, and it's terrified me. And I don't know if you know this, but back then there weren't a lot of running zombie movies.
Yeah,
They were,
it was slower zombies
yeah.
at that point. Yeah.
And I remember writing the story, like literally just writing the first 40 pages of it and being so excited about it. And then I gave it to a friend of mine, and he was a George Romero connoisseur, a huge fan of George Romero's favorite film is Night of the Living Dead. He read it and went, running zombies? What are you, stupid? And I guess I listened to him because I didn't write that story. I didn't continue. I just set that aside, started writing other stuff because I figured if I'm going to get this kind of reaction from the horror crowd, I'm not going to do this. Then a few years later, 28 Days Later comes out, the Dawn of the Dead remake, running zombies. And I just remember sitting there going, damn, I missed out. And so all these years later, COVID hits. I'm going through my short stories. I see that, I read it, and I go, you know what? I'm going to write this anyway. Even though I'm all these decades too late, I'm going to write this story. So I wrote it, and I always had the entire thing in my head because I saw it in a nightmare. And I wrote the thing, and it was the first thing I wrote for this book because I had to get that story out. All of a sudden, I had to get that story out. I'd went decades, and all of a sudden, I had to get that story out. So that's the one that's probably the most near and dear to my heart because it's the oldest, and it's just been in my head for so long, and I was just so proud to get it out. And then I guess another story that I love, it's another zombie story. There's only two, I believe, no, there's three. There's three zombie stories. The last story in the book is called Night of the Living. And I think it's I'm not patting myself on the back or anything. I think it's kind of a clever title. But basically, the good guy is a zombie, and he's being chased after by the evil humans. So the zombie is the protagonist.
I like that.
And it's called Night of the Living.
I've seen that before.
Yeah. And so basically, he's a zombie that still remembers what it's like to be human. He still has memories. He has the compulsion to eat what he eats, but he still has memories of the woman he loves, his life before. And when we first meet him, he's in a quarantine zone because in my mind, if there was ever a zombie invasion, there would be people in the world who wanted to save the zombies.
There would be. Yeah.
And they would win out somehow and make it to where they could, as long as we put them in a quarantine zone, we'll keep them alive and then maybe find a cure and bring them back.
That's
always
the character that drives me crazy in like zombie movies where they're like, we can save them. Like they're people.
Yeah.
It's always, yeah.
So mine begins with him in a quarantine zone. So all that's without being written has maybe happened. There's people that, let's put them in a quarantine zone. They'll be safe. We can find a cure. So he's in a quarantine zone and it's the anniversary, a special anniversary for him. And he remembers and he wants to get out and go find the woman he loves or loved once upon a time. And so he has to escape. But to escape means he's putting himself in danger because out in the world, outside the quarantine zone, there are human beings that would love nothing more than to just kill him. Mm-hmm. And so it's the story of him trying to see his first love one more time and then try to stay alive, or if you want to call it, stay undead.
That's a cool idea. I like that. And I apparently a couple of book contests thought it was a cool idea too. So I was taking a look at, when I was looking at your books, I saw that you were actually a finalist for 2 different awards and you won one award. So you were a finalist in the National Indie Excellence Awards, which is near and dear to my heart because I was a finalist for general fiction a few years ago in that contest. So I like that one. And then you were also a finalist for the SPR Book Awards, and then you were actually a winner for the Book Fest Awards. So congratulations on all of those because those are big achievements.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about, because I just put a video out recently about like some of the bigger indie book contests that people could enter into, and just talked a little bit about like what to expect, I guess, or like some things to know. What was that experience like for you? How did that go? Like tell us about your experience with actually a book contest and being a finalist or a winner.
Well, for me, it was daunting because again, putting my stuff out there for people to read is terrifying. That's why I didn't write a book until I was much older. Actually, putting my book in a contest and trying to place it and getting, hopefully winning or whatever was equally terrifying. But again, I had the attitude of, just do it. So I entered, and these are contests. You can go online and you can look them up, and you can look at their legitimate contests. I believe that there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's not so legitimate, but this stuff is the ones I've entered, the ones you just mentioned are legitimate contests. It costs money, but that's to weed out. They do it, I guess, to weed out. Not, I don't want to say the word pretenders, but they do it to weed out people.
Someone who's not that serious about it.
Yeah, or someone who's not serious. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an investment, but you're kind of investing in the future or the success of your book. It's just another way to publicize your book. If you win one of these contests or become a finalist, you can use that, and maybe someone will see that in a sea of books out there, see that you have a seal that says you were a finalist or that you were a winner, that they might give you a chance, especially if you're a first-time author like me. And so that's one of the reasons why I did it. The other reason was to see if it was good enough. I legitimately wanted to know if it was good enough. And so far, out of 11 contests that I've entered, I haven't heard back from one. So that means 10 left over. I placed in 7 of them.
Wow. That's really good. Like, that's really good.
So that it gives me the confidence to know that maybe I have a future in this. And, and I'm in the process of writing a second book. That certainly gives you a gust of wind to keep going forward and keep writing. And so that's why I did it twofold, to promote my book and hopefully inspire somebody to buy it. And also, am I good enough?
Absolutely. Like, there's a lot of indie authors that I've talked to who kind of have an experience with imposter syndrome. I know I do. I always am like, I know I was a finalist for a contest. I know that, people have received my writing well, but I still sit there and think like, oh my God, I'm terrible. And it's, I've always had like, I'm extremely confident in certain things and I'm extremely underconfident in other things. And this is one of the things that I tend to be not confident about. And having that award, or even just placing for it, really can help with that, especially when, like you were saying before, you give it to your book to people and then you're wondering like, oh, like, are they really, when they say it's good, is it like them actually saying it's good? Like, well, these are, these contests, these are judges you don't know. They're not like, it's not like giving it to your family and friends where they're going to be reluctant to tell you that something sucks. And, it's going to be more objective. So it really can help you build up some confidence in your own abilities as an author. And then you get the added bonus of that helping kind of vet your book to readers, where, you're like, people don't know who you are yet. So it's kind of like, well, if it won an award, maybe they don't know what that award is. Like maybe the reader is not familiar with National Indie Excellence Awards or something, but they see that it won an award or was a finalist, and that is enough. Like that'll give you an edge over someone who has like no reviews or very or very few reviews, and then no accolades at all. So I definitely can see how that could be helpful. So now you've published this book. You got some awards for it and placed as a finalist for some contests with it. What's kind of your plan? Like, has that encouraged you to write like more? Are you planning on any like more books of short stories, or maybe actually trying to tackle a full novel next time? Like, what's the future look like for Ray?
I'm in the process of writing a second novel of short stories, because again, I have a bunch. Now, the first book, all the best stuff I had. The second book is all the great, I'm gonna say great ideas, but all the best of whatever I have that I've had the last few years. Stuff that's just come to me that I was gonna save regardless for the second book. I already knew that my past was going to be my first book. Up till 2019, 2000, whatever. Everything before that was this book, the best of what I've written. Now it's new stuff. So I'm in the process of writing another short story book. And then after that, my plan is to write a novel. Horror. I'm sticking to horror.
I was about to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love horror. I'm unashamed about that. I know there's a lot of people that look down on it. Maybe, who knows? I don't know.
No, there are, unfortunately, because I don't understand it personally when people knock it. But yeah.
But I love it. I love the genre. It's what I would prefer to write in. I have stories that are not horror, And someday I'll write them, hopefully. But right now I want to get these stories of mine, because the first thing I want to do is horror. I've got all these ideas that I want to get out, because I think of it like voices in my head. I have all these stories in my head that I got to get out so I can sleep. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I'm constantly going in my head. I'm constantly got scenes in my head, dialogue, characters, plots going on, and I'll be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning going, please go to sleep.
You just need to get it out of your head. So
yeah,
with your story, so you're in Odessa. So I was talking to an author recently who he writes his stories based in Georgia because that's where he is. And I feel like the South is just such a good setting for horror, and I don't know why. Do you set your stories like in places where you've lived or places you're familiar with, or do you kind of have them scattered all over the place?
Places I've lived or places I've visited, because I feel like you need to have some kind of real world in it
Mm-hmm.
to make sense of it. Just like outlining your stories, I believe in outlining. I believe in having all your ducks in a row, and just say, look, somebody recognizes a town you're writing about, and they go, well, that's not there, and that doesn't exist. So I kind of like setting it in places like where I live, places I've been, because it gives me an anchor, something to latch onto. If you're just making up something, you're trying too hard to remember everything you've made up. Whereas if you just know it, you just write it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with screenwriting. I also write screenplays, and
oh, cool.
Once you figure out the format, you no longer have to think about the format. You just write. And in screenplays, you're also writing, like books, you're writing real stuff. And if you're writing about flying a plane, or if you're writing about riding a boat or a motorcycle or a jet, you better know something about that kind of stuff. Or guns, like for instance, if someone's shooting a gun, it would help for you to know how guns work and what gun is what, and is a rifle. What is
one
a
of my
rifle?
one of my biggest pet peeves is when, especially in movies, when they show guns operating in a way that is completely. I'm like, if it doesn't. No, I'm like I'm using my gun safe as a desk right now because, and I'm like, I'm like, guns don't just fire for no reason. Like, it makes no sense to me. So I totally agree. Write what you know with certain
Right.
things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's write what you know. So I write the towns I know or the place I've been. Because again, I don't want to sit there and have to think, I made up this town, but am I remembering everything? Did I set the grocery store here, and what is it nearby, and where's the church? And if I know the town, I don't have to think about this. It's just there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to put a link, obviously, to your book, but tell everyone who's listening where they can find that. Yeah, where can you get All the Monsters Are Here?
Okay, yeah, All the Monsters Are Here. 13 Spooky Tales. They can get it anywhere books are sold online. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads, just any site that sells books, it's on there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you one thing about that, actually. You did this through Page Publishing, which I actually had not heard of. I had done some videos like a long time ago about different companies you could go through for self-publishing. So I don't know anything about them. So what was your experience like going through Page Publishing? Because it looks like they have pretty good distribution. It's available all over the place.
Yeah, they do a really good job of getting it out there, but it's like any place that you're hoping to get published with, self-publishing, you're paying for it. Mm-hmm. And it's an investment, and I considered it an investment for my future. So it's something I was willing to do. I had the money for it. The time was right. So I did it. Page Publishing, it just happened when I was doing my research on companies to call. I went online and was doing some research about them. They called me.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like, and they said, "Well, you're interested?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I was just looking around, seeing what was out there." And he goes, "Well, consider us, and I'll send you some, stuff." And they sent me booklets and this and that. We'll do this and we'll do that. And I looked at the booklet and it said, they would get my book in any online store. They'll take care of all the publishing. They'll take care of the page design. They'll take care of the cover. All that stuff.
Oh, it's
all
everything.
I had to do was write it, and I'll have a say in it. But all I had to do was write the thing. and they're the ones that actually put the book together. And then after the book was made, then they help you get it in online stores. They help you market it. They help you. They get you on podcasts. For the first 3 months.
Oh wow. Okay.
They really kind of help you, and then you're on your own. And you
Nice.
can, and I can still call them today if I want to sell my own books. I can call them and buy my books at a discounted rate, and then sell them on my own. And then also I do my own digital marketing. I sell on TikTok, I sell on Facebook, I sell on Instagram. So if you want to find me, you can go to any TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere. All you have to do is look up my book, All the Monsters Are Here, and you can find me. But the book is on sale at all the usual online places, and they did that for me.
Awesome.
But it's an
a really
investment.
good arrangement. I'm sure the cost up front, I'm not going to ask you a specific number, but I'm sure you had to pay like a fairly substantial amount at the beginning. But that's a lot of services that they offer you, which I feel like probably makes it worth it, because I've published through like Ingram Spark. That's what I use now. And they have like some little marketing stuff they'll do for you if you pay extra, but for the most part, all they're doing is really printing. They don't do anything with the formatting, or at least the way I've used it, they don't do anything. So to have like a company that you go through that not only does the formatting, which is a pain in itself, if you try to do it yourself,
well.
and the editing, like you get everything then, and that's really helpful. And the idea that they'll even help with the marketing afterwards is, I think, almost even more important, because what I've found as an indie author is like, okay, yeah, you wrote the book, you got it out, but your work's not done yet. There's way more after that.
Yeah.
And I think some people will go into self-publishing thinking that you can just put a book up on Amazon and it'll sell, and it's like, no, it doesn't really work like that. Like it's there's a lot of work after the book is done. So it sounds really helpful to have a company that will support you with all of that, because not everyone has that.
And I would like to add that if you're a debut author, I was told by a lot of people, because you get called by a lot of people too. So once you put your book out, people get your name and they call you. And a lot of them are just wanting money and they're trying to scam you. Yeah. But every once in a while, you get somebody that calls you and just says, hey, I read your book. I love your book. I would love to help you sell it. And I'm like, well, I can't really afford your services. And I would love to, but I just can't. And they're like, well, I understand that. And he goes, but I want to tell you that your book, you could do this, you could do this, and you could do. I go, yeah. I just don't have the money. He goes, well, let me give you some advice. The best way to sell your book, write a second one.
Having more than one is helpful, for sure.
So I'm taking that advice, and that's why I'm going to write that second short story book. Just have a what do you call it? A body of work.
Mm-hmm. Well, if like a reader is looking at your book and then it's the same way with like podcasts or YouTube and all of that. Like maybe they'll find a video that they like, but then they go to your channel and they see that you don't really have any more, and then they don't end up subscribing because they think that you aren't putting out any more work. Like it's similar with a book, I would think. We're having a collection of your work like that. You get a reader to buy one, and then suddenly they like it, they're going to buy the rest of them, and then it kind of just like exponentially goes from there. So I'm excited to see, like your second book of short stories when you finish that and it comes out. I do want to check out your current book, because like I said, I do really like horror. It would be cool to read something by an indie author. I've read maybe like 2 indie horror books in the past. This was before I even started any of the social media stuff with writing. So it wasn't people I had like networked with. It was just ones I happened to find on Amazon. And indie author stuff always surprises me. So not anymore. Now that I know indie authors other than myself, I'm like, okay, yeah, I see that this is a group of people that really can produce high quality stuff. But before I even got into it, there's always like a little bit of a negative view of going the independent route when it comes to publishing. And I'll say I was guilty too of looking at it that way. And it would be really, I really do want to check yours out, because I think it would be really cool to see just what indie horror is all about. And I like the zombie ones that you had mentioned to me, because you really turned the whole zombie trope on its head, at least with one of them. So I like that a lot. Yeah,
there are pretty straightforward horror stories in my book, but a few of them I tried thinking of it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's cool. It sets it apart. So,
And
yeah,
the monsters in my book not necessarily are like monster, you know, like wolfmen, vampires. Could be humans too,
mhm.
because humans are way scarier
I was gonna
than
say
any
we could be
monster.
just as horrifying,
So
just
yeah,
as
some
horrifying.
monsters in my book are some of the monsters in my book are very human, and
Mhm.
they do horrible things. And then Night of the Living is a really good example. The humans are horrible because fear makes you do bad things sometimes, and there's nothing worse than a scared human.
Absolutely, and scared groups of humans are the
Yeah,
most terrifying thing, I think, and just like Y2K, like we were talking about, seeing how
yeah,
people behave.
yeah.
But yeah,
It's a tiny part of that story, but it's in there because it was written that long ago.
mhm.
And there's a character that's older, and he went through that. But I kept that in there because it was kind of honoring that I wrote this a long time ago. I just wanted to keep it. It may date it a little bit, but I kept that in there for a reason, because that's kind of what I think that's the reason why I had that nightmare to begin with, because of all
Mhm.
the. If people did not remember that, it was a weird time where people
Yeah,
literally thought the world was going to end.
we were just like inundated. I mean, I was young. I was in like fifth grade, but I remember it happening because I remember the subject coming up in class a bunch of times where kids were literally crying because they were talking about how their parents were telling them that the world was ending. And then I specifically remember one girl when, they were saying like Y2K virus, which I guess was like a little bit of like a misnomer because it's not necessarily a virus. It was more like they thought that the clocks would everything in terms of like databases would be messed up when it couldn't figure out the date. So I guess it wasn't really like a virus, but I remember this girl, and this to show you this affected children too at the time. This girl was saying that she had heard that the Y2K virus was going to fly to the sun and blow the sun up, and which absurd, but like people were just, it was all they could talk about. And then even kids like my age at that time were hearing this, and then kids are going to distort it a lot, and everyone was panicking over something that ended up being kind of like a nothing burger, just like 2012.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
They really thought the world was going to end. The computers were going to crash. The world was going to end. People were going to go nuts, and it was every man for himself,
Mm-hmm.
like the Wild Wild West or something. My dad was one of those guys. He had a storm shelter. He had all kinds of canned foods and gallons of water and gas masks. Everything you think of, just had it. And I had that nightmare, and it felt so real. And then plus, in my book, in that story, there's a character who's a kind of a, I don't want to call him a guy. I don't want to offend anybody, but survivalist.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that think the end of the world is coming, so they're stockpiling weapons and ammunition. So
Yeah.
who exactly would you want to be near when the zombie apocalypse happened? You want to be next to that guy
Yeah, I want to
because
be
he's
with the
prepared.
preppers.
But in a civilized world, that back then we may have made fun of those people for being a little paranoid, but they're exactly who you'd want to be with when that happens. So there's a character in that story that he's a survivalist, and it's based on a real guy. So when the people read the story, I don't want people to go, "Oh my God, this guy, he's a survivalist. He can fly a plane, all this other stuff." It just so happens I knew a guy that could do all of that. He's a survivalist, and he could fly a plane. He was a classical pianist. He was so many things, and he's the character of my story. And he may not even recognize himself in it, but that guy is a real guy. So I don't want people to think that I'm totally making any of that story up, except for the zombie part. It's people I know thrown in, because in my nightmare was people I know in the zombie apocalypse and how they would get through it, including me. I'd be totally lost. I'd be totally defenseless, be totally useless. And then there's people I know that would be the guy you'd want to be near, or the people, also people I know that you may not want to be with them at the end, even though they're your friends. You may not want to be with those people. So that story means a lot in so many different ways.
Well, cool. Well, anyone who is interested in a zombie story, or just horror in general, I really encourage you to go check out All the Monsters Are Here. It is available anywhere where books are sold online. Thank you so much, Ray, for being here. Just remember, everyone, he's writing under, his name on his book is Aaron Ray Ballard. So don't necessarily just look for Ray if you're going to look, but the links are going to be in the description. And anyone who's into horror, I know that fantasy seems to be the big thing among people who follow me, but anyone who's interested in horror, please go check that out. It's 13 short stories. So if you're the type of person that maybe doesn't have a ton of time to read an entire novel, you can at least break this down into little 13 short stories, and it'll be a little bit easier to tackle. So thank you so much, Ray, for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I hope to see your sequel or your second book. It's coming out soon. I hope to see that.
Next year.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ray. And if anyone who's watching is an indie author and is interested in maybe appearing on my channel and being interviewed and have a chance to talk about your book, please send me an email at roughrider@protonmail.com. And until next time, thanks so much, everyone. God bless you all.